So, as I said before, we just wrapped up the first part, which is about the changes during the last 40 years. Now I want to move on to part B, which is the current snapshot, and then I have a lot to cover in this period, so forgive me. But before I get into that, I alluded before to the whole Cultivating Unity process. Cultivating Unity is something that we've done for many dioceses throughout the country. Your bishop just contracted with us to do it with all of you. We're going to be sending out surveys to you around January. They're going to be totally anonymous, confidential surveys. I beg you guys to please respond the highest rates you possibly can. My guess is you're going to come in around 70%, but I had one diocese one time up as high as 88% response rate. So I really hope all of you, and then the flyer in your green folder, there's a printout of what Cultivating Unity is all about. Do you all have that? Do you know what I'm talking about? You see it there? Okay. So exactly. So that gives you a broader explanation. So we're going to do that around January, and then around March or April, depending when Father Warren and I can work out the dates, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to hold 2 listening sessions where I'm going to gather with you priests, and again, in an anonymous, confidential way. We're not going to let the bishop be there, or the vicar general, or anyone else in authority. I'm going to gather with you, and I'm going to ask you to tell me, what your experience of priesthood is like here. I'm going to gather all that, and again, report it anonymously. There's going to be no identifying information. And I'm going to write about, usually most of my reports about 90 to 100 pages, but it will be a very full analysis, current analysis of the state of your presbyterate. And I'll be comparing you to the national samples, comparing you among yourselves, different generations, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very excited to do it with you. But so just when you get the survey in the mail, please respond to it. Please mail it back to us down in Washington so that we can actually, the higher response rate, the better the report will be. And then I'll see you all again. As I said, March or April, we'll work that out. And then I'll see you again in October when I'll be coming back here with Dominic Perry, who's my co-facilitator for these conferences, these convocations, and he did confirm to me that he will be joining us. So he's really a great facilitator. So that's Cultivating Unity. Please participate. So we're going to get into letter B, current snapshot of priest. Again, I divided this into 4 different areas. You can see them right there: increasing satisfaction, growing commitment, sources of satisfaction, and the most common problems that they mention to us. So as we get to increasing satisfaction, anytime you see a quote up here on the board that's in italics, it means that it's an exact quote from someone that we interviewed, either someone in one of my listening sessions or someone on one of our one-on-one interviews. But this priest is talking about in a very beautiful way how much he loves being a priest, how it's been a great road for him in his life, and his only sadness was that he was getting older and he wouldn't have that many more years to conduct his priestly ministry. But he really, really loved it. And that quote I put up there is obviously from one man, but it was very emblematic of so many of the people that we interviewed. So many of the priests expressed such deep joy in their ministry. They really loved being with the people. They really loved getting letters from the chancery demanding more things. No, I'm only kidding you. No. All right, priests never said they loved those things. But what they loved being with their people. They loved preaching. They loved being with them. And here, what I wanted to show, remember I talked to you about the idea of longitudinal studies and how worthwhile they are? So I want you to look at this data here. So you have the 5 waves of the study: 1970, 1985, 1993, 2009, 2001, 2009, and now we're doing 2017. So that book will be out in about another 2 years. But you can see the question that we asked, will you leave the priesthood or not? And every priest had the option to give 4 answers. Either the answer was definitely will not leave, probably will not leave, probably will leave, or definitely will leave, right? So each priest had the 4 options. So we combined together those who said that they would not leave. And you can see over the course of time, that percentage went up from 88, 93, to 95, to 97. Then the second question And we as sociologists, bear with us, but we love asking similar questions, attack things from different angles, because we want to get at different things in different ways. So sometimes we say, didn't you just ask me something like this? Well, we're doing it for a reason. This other question was whether you would choose the priesthood again or not, right? Very similar to satisfaction and things like that. Would you choose it or not? The question was sadly was not asked during the second or third wave, but it was asked in the fourth and fifth wave. And again, you can see the increase from 79% to 88 to 95%, right? So a growing sense of, wow, I really loved being a priest. I would choose it again. Then the question about very happy. This is from the general GSS out of University of Chicago, the question they ask every year to thousands of Americans. We put it in the first 4 waves. In our 5th wave of the study, we didn't put it in because we were just too crammed. We had added in so many questions about multiculturalism, so many other questions that we didn't have space for it. But you can see, again, the increase is going in the right direction. So this increasing satisfaction, as I said, in spite of the declining clerical ranks, in spite of the heavier workloads, we as the sociologists, I mean, we were very pleasantly surprised. We're like, wow. I mean, these priests, you would think in any other profession, like if you go to the medical field, if there were fewer doctors and more sick people and the doctors had to work longer hours, you think they'd be less satisfied and less happy. That's what you would think. But we found it was just the opposite, right? It was the opposite thing, that priests were increasingly happier and happier. And this corresponds to a wonderful book that Father Greeley wrote in 2004, based out on a Los Angeles Times survey. And Hoagie as well found it in that previous wave, is that this increasing satisfaction among priests is something that's very beautiful. This brings me to and I'm sorry I'm going fast, but I just want to cover a lot of material. So if I go way too fast, just someone raise your hand. But the second point is about growing commitment, which is kind of like correlated, obviously, with satisfaction. What I want you to look at right now is just look at the 1985 data. Just want to look straight down this column. So this question, we're asking those, again, a cold question, this is a different breakdown of it, of guys who said they would definitely not leave the priesthood. So in 1985, priests who were in their 30s, the first row here, 37% of them said they would definitely not leave the priesthood. The next line down, the guys who were in their 40s, 44% of them said they would definitely not leave the priesthood. Then you get to the guys in their 50s. 69% of them say they won't leave the priesthood, right? And as we go down, you expect the number to go up, right? Normally, when priests leave the priesthood, it's normally at a younger age, right? And that's actually a whole nother thing that we're dealing with right now. Guys ordained in the last 5 years, we're starting to have problems again. In our own diocese, we've had a few guys leave very soon, which makes us all question whatever. That's a whole nother topic. But so you expect the numbers to increase over time, right? Now, if you look at it by time-wise, just look at the bottom line. The bottom line, the 62%, is the summary of all of the previous numbers, right? When we weight all the different age categories. So 1985, the bottom line is that 62% of priests said that they would definitely not leave the priesthood. If you go across that line at the bottom, you see the number goes from 62 to 72 to 79 to 86, right? So again, moving in the right direction of guys being more and more committed to the priesthood. So while that's interesting, and while you could also look at this from a diagonal perspective, for example, you could take the guys who were in their 30s in 1985, 37% of them said they would not leave. If you jump over to 1993, now they're in their 40s, 50% of them said they wouldn't leave. You go another 8-10 years, 2001, now they're in their 50s, 70% won't leave. Again, you expect that to be happening. But none of what I just said in the last minute is the most important thing. The most important thing on this graph is the first line. Priests in their 30s who said they would definitely not leave the priesthood has gone from 37% in 1985 to 88%, a 51% increase in commitment to the priesthood. That is outstanding, astounding. It's crazy statistically, those type of numbers, which speaks of the fact that I think in many cases, these guys are also entering a bit older, right? They're a little bit more sure of what they're doing. It's also more of a counter-cultural thing than, say, the guys that entered in the 50s and 60s and everything, right? So it's a different type of thing. But this is a sense of deeply growing commitment that's here. So this explains what I just said before, that the younger priests are even more committed than younger priests were in the past. Now, part of that, we thought it could be related to the fact that they're becoming pastors sooner, because in my uncle's study back in 1968, one of the things that he found is that a lot of it was a book called America's Forgotten Priest. I think Bishop over here read it. Another great book, right? America's Forgotten Priest. He was talking about all of those priests who were the associates who were so frustrated not being able to get to be a pastor and not being able to be the one to make those decisions. But even with that going into it, we still found there's an increasing satisfaction among the pastoral associates, or we say parochial vicars. What do you say? Parochial vicars as well, okay. So parochial vicars are even they're increasing in their satisfaction. They're increasing in their commitment. So it's a bizarre thing that we found, a happy thing that we found, but something that statistically, I just want to point out to you, to go from 37 to 88, and the same demographic that we're studying is huge, and it speaks volumes of what's happening. Third point in this middle part. What are their sources of satisfaction? And I kind of joked about it before, but priests, whether they're very conservative or very liberal or progressive or traditional, whatever, it seems universally everyone just loves being with their people and celebrating Mass and preaching and hearing confession. So all of those sacramental things are the things we all enjoy. Like, we rarely found a priest that says, I love administrative work. I love the fact that I have to fill out these reports and send them to the chancery. I really enjoy that, right? None of them ever said that, but they all spoke of these beautiful moments. And I'm sure all of us priests here have had it today. When you're with someone who's dying, when you're with the family. Just this morning, as I was coming up here, a couple that I'd married last year, they just had their first baby. So excited for them. And they just sent me a text early this morning saying she's in the NICU unit. Please pray. Something's gone wrong. And, you as a priest, you're the first person they reach out to. The very first person. And it's something that we all experience. And it's that connection with people that I think ultimately what makes us so incredibly happy and joyful, knowing that we're fulfilling God's will and being in tremendous service to our people. So looking at the sources of satisfaction, also you'll see in our book, we did try to divide out diocesan and religious. Are there any religious priests with us today? No, everyone's diocesan. How many, do you have a religious order priest here? Okay, were they invited? They were, okay. Because they should definitely be invited as well to Cultivating Unity, which we can speak about there. But I'm sad that none of them are here today. Unless you're hiding. Anyone hiding? No? You're all here, okay. But anyway, we were trying to tease out. But in many ways, we've actually found that there really isn't much difference between diocesan priests and religious order priests, especially those that work in parishes. They're almost exactly kind of the same in that regard. But here we're talking about, really it's the left column that I want you to look at. But what are the sources of satisfaction? And again, it's everything I just said before. It's preaching, it's the joy of administering the sacraments, being part of a community, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see all of those. This is another quote, which I've done a study on Protestant ministers and affirmation, which I would love to replicate with Catholic priests, but I just haven't had the time yet to do it. But these priests were speaking about how affirmation from the people is what really gives them a tremendous source of satisfaction. And I think we've all had that experience, right? When you deliver a wonderful homily on the weekend and a lot of people come out as they're leaving church and say, wow, Father, I really love that. Thank you so much, right? You kind of have a happier day. Someone comes out and accuses you of being a heretic or accuses you of whatever, or is angry at you or spits at you or whatever they do, you're not going to have a good rest of the day, and probably a pretty crappy week the rest of the time as well, right? So it's definitely that relationship, right, with the people that we found the priests were talking about, that satisfaction coming from there. But our book is not a Pollyannish book at all. We don't hide from the problems, even though we're saying the priests are more committed and they're more satisfied, et cetera, et cetera. It's not like they're telling us everything is wonderful and great. And believe me, I've done enough work in dioceses where, there are tensions, as we said, that ideological tension that Dean Hoagie had discovered between kind of the older generation and the younger generation, the more liberal, the more conservative. I've been to dioceses where it's a geographic difference. I was in one diocese where the northern part is a very wealthy part of the diocese, and the southern part was a very poor part. And when I did my listening sessions for that diocese, I was amazed. When I went into the first session, it was basically, they were all white priests that were there. And when I asked them their opinion on the bishop or opinion on other things, they held nothing back. And they told me everything they were angry at and blah, blah, blah. And then I went to the southern part of the diocese, and almost all of them were priests from Nigeria, the Philippines, other countries. And I asked them, did you have any problems with the bishop? Zip. Nothing. They said absolutely nothing. Because in their culture, and their cultures, you never speak badly of your elders, right? You never speak badly of an authority figure. And so they weren't about to do something like that. So I was amazed. I thought I was in two different dioceses. I was like, holy moly, like just, an hour and a half ago, I heard all these complaints. Come down here now and you're telling me everything's fine. So I finally pulled some of them aside afterwards. And I said, really? You really don't have any issues? And some of them opened up. I said, yeah, Father, why are we here? Why are we in the poor part of the diocese? Why are we never assigned to the northern part of the diocese? I said, right? And when I reported that back to the whole presbyterate, it was something that no one had seen. I think it's one of the great values of research, right? Is that we're all too close. You can't see the forest for the trees. Someone comes from the outside and sees something that, wow, light goes on, right? We got to look at things in different ways. But anyway, so what were the common problems that they spoke about? And here, I really want you to concentrate on the far right column, because this combines the two categories. And again, we gave priests the option to give 4 choices to their answer. So we spoke about the way authority is exercised in the church. 2/3 of them said that was either somewhat or a great problem. Shortage of priests, again, 2/3 of them said that was a problem. I actually, personally, I never liked that first question because I think it's too vague. And as sociologists, we do not like vague questions, because the way authority is exercised in the church, it can mean you're a parochial vicar and you have a real authoritarian pastor who tells you what to do all the time, and you may not like that. Or it may be that you have a bishop that you don't like, or a vicar general you don't like. I mean, who knows what it is? It's too broad, that particular question. But the fact of the matter, 2/3 of the guys said that some way, some form, they have some difficulty with some authority in the church. Unrealistic demands of the laity, too much work. And again, this always varied by places where you were. In some cases, I was somewhat struck as funny, because sometimes the guys in the South, who proportionately, you could say, are doing a lot more work than us up in the North in terms of the number of people they have to tend to, we would often be the ones kind of complaining more than they were complaining, which was, I just thought it was somewhat interesting. But anyway, the way authority is exercised in the church. This quote, I remember exactly who this priest is, and I remember exactly when he said it, and it was one of the saddest moments in my research career when he was saying this. But this is what we're getting at the authority. I'll just let you read it. So that kind of gets at the frustration of many priests who felt that they weren't being respected in one way or the other. The more common problem, and probably easier to articulate, was this idea of too much work. And this priest, who was a full-time hospital chaplain, again, I remember very well when I interviewed him, and he was explaining about how he's like just so tired all the time. He falls asleep in the chair, doesn't pray the breviary. The whole day just goes by and everything. And again, I think so many of us can really very much identify with that reality. So that was my second part. So increasing satisfaction, growing commitment, sources of satisfaction, most common problems. Now I'm going to go to the third part, right? Areas of ongoing formation. This is what we as researchers see as being areas that we think the priesthood in general in the United States really needs to look upon. So again, I break it down into 4 areas: collaborative ministry, multicultural ministry, multi-parish ministry, and vocational promotion. So in collaborative ministry, again, when the study was first launched in 1970, there were no permanent deacons serving yet in the United States, right? We were just starting having our permanent diaconate classes, or there were none of them at the time. So the idea of collaborating with a married man who's a permanent deacon was not a reality back at that time. Lay ecclesial ministers, that title definitely did not exist back then. So what you see in these lines, though, is the blue line up above is the number of priests, and this goes from 1976 to 2008. But if we went back further in time, you'd see even a starker decline. But you can see these numbers are going down. And these numbers are combined religious and diocesan. At that same time that number has been going down, if you look at the red line at the bottom, that's the number of permanent deacons that we have in the church and the way they've been increasing. I think it was about 3 years ago where we reached the point where we actually have more permanent deacons in the United States than we have religious order priests. And if we go further out in time, and if the numbers keep going the way they're going, I'd say in about another 10, 15 years, we're actually going to have more permanent deacons than all of the diocesan priests. And then if you go out about 30 years, again, extrapolating the numbers, and a lot can happen, we'll actually have more permanent deacons than all priests combined in the United States, if these numbers keep going the way they're going. And you can see the increase in permanent deacons. If you were to add that number back up to the top blue line, you'd be back at the basic same number. The green line was harder for us to track, and that's why it's much more extrapolated. But these are the realities of the lay ecclesial ministers. But it's really hard to get the data there, and it's a lot more nebulous type of area. It's a lot easier to count deacons and priests than it is lay ecclesial ministers. So this reality, we are asking the priest how important it is to have open discussions on these different topics: collaborating with lay ecclesial ministers, collaborating with deacons, collaborating with international priests. And the one thing we found, which at first it made us kind of scratch our heads, and it seemed like the younger generation of priests, the millennial generation, were really not as open, right, to these topics, because you can see the percentages kind of go down as you go across the board. But upon further reflection and analysis, we came to realize that, well, most of these younger millennial priests have already grown up with this reality, so they don't really feel the need to have much more of a discussion on the topics, right? Because it's already there. But again, these are generational differences. So collaborative ministry, as the number of priests continues to decline, it's going to become more and more the norm. At my parish, as I told you, we have 11,000 parishioners. We have 27 people on the payroll, right? 3 of them are priests, 1 is a deacon, the other 23 or whatever are all lay people, right? If you went back in time, you wouldn't have that back in the 70s. You'd have a janitor, a maintenance man, and you'd have a secretary. And she'd probably be a volunteer or something, right? But now it's very, very different the way things have done. So we've tried to speak to these. And this bottom paragraph here gets to the point what I was trying to say before. Even though it seems the more recently ordained guys exhibit lower levels of acceptance of lay ministry. We also came to the conclusion that it's probably they just don't have enough experience in ministry just yet to realize how important it is, but also the fact of the matter that, that it's a reality of their all lives already. And I am racing against time here, which really stinks. But multicultural ministry. This quote here is a great one about this is what the Catholic Church is all about, welcoming these different immigrants, people coming together. This particular priest, I remember, he said about how beautiful it was in the parish where they sang Silent Night in like whatever 4 different languages. And it's so beautiful that the song sounds the same in every language. You just change the words. Right after I interviewed him, the very next priest, when I asked him about multicultural ministry, he says it doesn't work. And he told me this whole story when in his parish, they decided he was tired of doing 2 Good Friday services, one in English, one in Spanish, doing all these things, one in English, one in Spanish. So this year he said, let's bring the communities together. Let's have one service, and we'll rotate back and forth. Guess what happened? No one showed up. He said the Hispanics didn't want a half English thing. The English speakers didn't want a half Spanish thing, so they all went to the neighboring parishes where they could get that. So multicultural ministry, as we call it in the book, it's both a blessing and a challenge, a huge challenge in many areas. But talking about the actual characteristics of place of birth of our priests, so the priests that are here in this bottom line, the millennial generation, those ordained since 1992 to the present, 51% of them were born outside the United States, whereas in that pre-Vatican II generation, only 7% were. So you can see where these things, shift, and that's our reality there. Then this table here is basically based on Dean Hoagie's understanding of the cultic model of priesthood, where we have priests who are considered more ideologically progressive, the priests are considered more ideologically traditionalist. And what you can see is that the international priests on the far right, bottom right, 37% of them identify with the more traditional approach, right? Whereas only 7% of them are in the more progressive. So that difference from 7 to 37 shows that there's a shift more towards that traditional aspect, which in some places, if you have a very liberal or very progressive parish, and now you're bringing a priest who comes from a more conservative background, more traditional background, it can lead to a lot of conflicts. And we've seen that all over the place. And then third one, which is it a reality yet? Are any of you covering 2 or 3 parishes? Only 2 of you are. Okay, so it's not really a huge reality just yet here. There are other dioceses when I go in and like more than half the hands of the priests go up. This, for you 2 that raised your hands, you 2 would be the ones I'd be most concerned about in your presbyterate here. Because what we found from our research is that when priests have to minister multiple parishes, it really leads to a lot more burnout, a lot more difficulties and problems. You probably both have broad shoulders, you're both probably very strong. But our research has shown that's one of the things where it really does become wearing on guys, and it's something that we're, in a certain sense, trying to advise bishops not to do, because there's only so many hours in the day, only so much what people can do. But anyway, this is just more about parish distribution, and I really want to get through to the other part, so I'm going to skip over that. This guy talking about giving his days off, he hadn't had a day off in years or whatever. And even when he does have his day off, he's still doing church things anyway. But this I want to get to. I want to end kind of like on a bit of a high note as well. This is our last chapter. This is chapter 8 in our book about vocational promotion. And in this, these 3 quotes that you see here are quotes, very interestingly, from the first one is from a newly ordained younger priest. And this is the question we asked to them is, what would you say to a young man today considering a vocation to the priesthood? Right? So the youngest priest, there are many other answers here, but these are the 3 that we chose. He said, be not afraid, life of priest is very fulfilling, very positive, like go enter the seminary. The second guy, who's in his 50s or 60s, late 50s, early 60s, his quote is also very powerful, right? As both the laity and the episcopacy hold priests in utter contempt, I could not, in good conscience, encourage anyone to consider a vocation to the priesthood. That was his answer, what he would say to a young man considering it. And then the last one was actually an 80-something-year-old religious order priest, and he said he would tell them, let nothing deter you, pray and consider all options, both diocesan and religious, and seek the counsel of a faithful spiritual director. So that's chapter 8, and it's a very good chapter, but, and it does show that the younger generation of priests today are promoting vocations. There was a generation of priests, again, a lot of them in that group of the late 60s, early 70s, which were not promoting the priesthood as much. And I think a lot of the reason why we had that decline in priesthood is because they were not promoting it. And think about Andrew Greeley. You may like him or dislike him. What a prophet he was in 1972. This is from that original study we spoke about. I'll give you time to let this sink in here. It says, it is helpful to recall the conclusion, right, that Father Greeley gave 40 years ago, now almost 45 years ago, right? He said, if priests are among the most effective recruiters of other priests, and if their enthusiasm for recruitment has undergone a considerable decline, then it is not likely that the present vocation crisis will cease unless there is once again a return to some higher level of enthusiasm for vocational recruiting among the clergy. Truly prophetic words. He nailed it, and that is exactly what kind of happened over these years. But the good news in our book you'll see is that there's now a shift to promoting. I myself have been doing, every year I'm dealing with like 1 or 2 young men that are considering that, or even to the convent, always trying to promote it and push it as best I can. And I know many of you are doing the same. But these were the 4 topics. That was the overview of the whole thing. I feel like I was running the last thing, but I wanted to leave time for good questions.